Am I on, James? Hey, there we go. What's up?
I'm still shooting low, and I didn't bring anything to adjust my sight, so I'm gonna have to go back. But which way? I guess I'll figure it out. But
Yeah,
I gotta come up with the back side.
you got to go up to put the front down. Yeah.
Well, I want to bring the front up.
So screw your sight in and make your gun do that.
Down.
Mhm.
So, how you
We
shooting?
live. Hello, Facebook. We're giving tips on how to adjust sights on pistols. It's all good. No problem. And we're still waiting on T. Joe and the rest of the crew to come in here. Yeah, I mean, look, Ronnie got his American flag on his shirt. He's already ready. He got
Freedom.
he got freedom on his shirt. He's ready to go. That's it. That's right.
You shoot with both. I tried shooting. I did just as well.
Yeah, yeah.
When I couldn't depend on my sights. Well,
But you know you live on Facebook, right? It's all right, Mr. Ronnie. We'll talk about it here in a minute. T. Joe and them will show up in here in a second. But thank y'all, Facebook, for coming and join us tonight. If you need lessons on how to adjust your sights on your pistol, call me later. We'll talk about it. But tonight we're going to talk about in space hyphen whatever you want to use Dependence Day. Tomorrow's July 4th. Tomorrow's July 4th. And tomorrow's Independence Day, all one word. So, does anybody know? We're going to get some crowd participation in here. Does anybody know why we declared independence?
Taxation without representation.
Man, look, that's an educated guy right there. Taxation without representation. We'll give you a bag of chips from Fabian's house later. There's about 1,700 of them in there. Now, we know Fabian was there for Independence Day, the first one. He was there in 1776. Fabian was there. We're good. Fabian said he signed it. He signed the declaration, so we're good. So, who was taxing us without us being represented? The British. King of England, right? King of England. Where was he at? Way across the ocean, right? Middle of nowhere. We not over there. We over here. So, another question. So, how did people end up on this continent? Like, where did we come from? We did come from England and from Europe, France, Germany. He was Spanish. But yeah, he was Spanish, but he wasn't here.
He didn't know he discovered. He thought
Yeah.
it was an Indian.
He didn't know. But eventually the pilgrims show up. So why did the pilgrims come? Religious freedom. And to colonize.
And to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ.
They did. Spread the gospel of Jesus. But also to be able to read the Bible legally. Because in England, you were not allowed to own a Bible. So what had happened was, back in the day, before that happens, there's this thing called the Protestant Reformation that happens. Martin Luther, correct. See, we get some history lesson in first. So the pilgrims were exiles or refugees from England. They went to Geneva, Switzerland, where there was this thing called a printing press, where they were printing Bibles, correct. So in Geneva, they were printing Bibles. The Geneva Bible is what it's called. They were printing it in German and English. That was the first printed Bible. No, King James was after that. So when the pilgrims came here, they only had one Bible. Wasn't a King James Bible. They were in Geneva, so they brought the Geneva Bible because they was trying to get away from King of England, so they surely wasn't taking his Bible with them. They wasn't bringing that on their boat. Excuse me. So the boats that the pilgrims were on, just for the record, were tiny, super, super tiny. Like if we went down to the bay down here, you see a big shrimp boat, about the same size. Not much difference. But those pilgrims, they're going across a huge ocean. They're not just going across the Vermilion Bay or whatever, going fishing, catching redfish, but they're coming from Denmark and Switzerland in these little bitty boats crossing half the world. They had to have a huge amount of trust and faith in what they were doing. And again, who was leading them to do it, right? I'm not getting on a boat going across the ocean that don't have a big old engine on it. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not that guy. They do sink. But
The sail.
the pilgrims are part of the reason why we have Independence Day, because they were trying to get independence from people doing something different to them. It was tyrannical, naturally, but it had to do with what we're going to talk about today. So I want you to start off, maybe close your eyes, and think about you're in Egypt, right? This is pre-Moses showing up on the scene. You're sitting there. You're a slave. You look around Egypt and you're doing your daily task, whatever the Egyptians are having you doing as you're an Israelite. You're walking around. You're seeing all these different gods, these statues, maybe the Sphinx, some pyramids, a picture of Joe maybe. But think about that and all that. I mean, everybody's seen pictures today of Egypt. All the stuff that's there that they dig up out of the sand. I mean, it's tremendous the amount of stuff that was built there. It's unbelievable. But you're an Israelite. You're not really. You're called a Hebrew at that time. You're not really called an Israelite yet. But then this guy shows up. He says, "I'm gonna take y'all out of here." What would you think if that was the deal? What was it? What'd you say, T-Joe? Ain't happening. What? Show me? Show me. There you go, Mr. Wayne. Show me. I mean, the one question I would ask is, so where are we going? What are we going to do? What's the point? I'm getting fed here. Getting clothed over here. We're building all this cool stuff. I'm a slave still, but I don't have to go out and kill my own food or whatever. They tell me where to go get it, I go get it. They tell me when to eat it. They tell me where to live. They did. But at this point, if you had an opinion, you might have got smacked upside the head. If you're a slave, you don't really get an opinion. True. So they're in a different mindset at that point. They're in that, what we'll call the first birth mindset. You're captive. You're in your flesh. You're doing all this toiling, all this manual labor, all this slave stuff. But you are building some pretty cool stuff. I mean, the pyramids are just cool, just for the record. I mean, it's pretty impressive. If you had to be building some stuff, I mean, I'd be rather building that than a grass hut somewhere, but totally different deal. But so Moses comes along, and God's doing his thing. He's putting the plagues on Egypt. He's hardening Pharaoh's heart. He's doing all that stuff, and you're watching it. Then all of a sudden, the Passover happens. Then, okay, you get to witness that. You get to maybe hear that, what goes on that night. And then God gives the Hebrews a bunch of instructions. And what does he tell them to do? He tells them to remember that. I want you to remember this day. And there's certain things I want you to do every year to remember this day, right? And then what happens? What happens the next day? They're gone. They're leaving. So they're leaving. They don't know where they're going. They really don't. Now, they did loot Egypt. They took all the stuff they were told to take. They're leaving. Then Pharaoh says, okay, we're going to get them. We can't let them leave. So they're getting across the Red Sea. They're following Moses. Everything's cool. The Egyptians are chasing them. They get across the Red Sea. Then one of the Egyptians says, hey, look, we can't chase them no more. God's doing his thing. The God of the Hebrews he's fighting for them. He's taking them where he wants them to go. We need to turn around. Well, at that point, it was too late. So you're still a Hebrew or an Israelite. You watch all this unfold. You get across there. You get across the water. You see these big pillars of water on each side of you. You're walking on dry land where the water used to be. And you get to the other side. Then what? Then when you get to the other side of that water, what are you thinking at that time? Now what, T. Joe? Now what? Now what are we going to do? But at the same time, Moses is giving you instructions. He's telling everybody what's going on. You're going in the desert. Now, granted, they were grumbling and mumbling and mad about this and that. But when they got across there, all those people that were there initially, when they crossed the Red Sea, they had been in Egypt their whole life. That's the only mindset they have. They don't know anything about anything else. They've always been slaves. They didn't know freedom. They didn't know what was on the other side of that water. Had no clue. Never been there. Wasn't allowed to be. So now we're going to think in a different way. You're in the desert. You're following Moses. You may or may not like it. You may or may not like the food, Jaden. You may get tired of eating that manna all day, every day. You want some meat. I mean, it's natural human deal. You don't want to eat the same potato chip all day, Joe, every day for 40 years. Chip's pretty good. But you're sitting there thinking, going, man, this is a different deal. But at the same time, God had a plan for this. So these are to be his people, right? He's bringing them to a place. They don't necessarily know what this place is. They don't necessarily know where it's at. But they're still in this Egyptian Hebrew mindset, we'll say, this first birth mindset, this before we got baptized across the Red Sea mindset, that working in the flesh mindset. So now you're in the desert, and what's God doing there to the people? Why does he have them there? Jaden said teaching them to trust. Anybody else? He's teaching them to trust. He's also teaching them discipline. He's also teaching them what the chain of command is. Joe knows what I'm talking about. So everybody know what a chain of command is. So in the military, it goes commander in chief, which is the president. Then you have your generals, colonels, captains, so on and so forth, all the way down to that lowly private. When God brought them across the Red Sea, he said, I'm bringing the Israelites out as an army in divisions. He also didn't bring them through Philistine territory. He took them way out in the desert, told Moses to bring them way around and go around that because they wasn't ready to fight the Philistines. They weren't trained yet. They had to go to the desert to get some training because they wasn't ready. And we know they wasn't ready because as soon as Moses went up the mountain, they started doing stuff they weren't supposed to be. So they reverted to that old self, that first birth mindset. Start building statues like they did on the other side, doing stuff with their hands, working. What happened was they got too comfortable. They said, we're going to start working. We got to do something. But that's not what God wanted them to be doing. What did God want them to do?
Be patient and wait.
What's that? Partly, yeah. Well, they were watching Moses come back and forth talking with God. Moses brings them the law. He's teaching them discipline. He's teaching them what the chain of command is. They talk to Moses. Moses talks to God. Moses comes back down, talks to them, so on and so forth, back and forth. But they get to see something else, too, in that whole process. They get to see where the authority is and where it comes from. So there's a difference between having authority and being the authority. So let's say you were a scientist, per se, and you came up with, let's just say you built the atomic bomb. Who would be the authority on the atomic bomb? If you invented it, you would be the authority. Kind of like God. God invented man. He's the authority. He built creation. He's the authority. Moses isn't looking to one of the Hebrews to know what's going on. He goes talk to the one who has the authority, right? So then, Moses, from God, is given authority to tell Israel what's happening, what to do, where to go, how to do it, what they should be doing. But still, like you were saying, Israelites want to be grumpy. They want to complain. They want to get busy doing stuff with their hands, building idols, whatever. Then they get all the way over to the Holy Land. But what happens? All the ones from Egypt that came out of Egypt initially, that generation doesn't get to go in. Not one of them, Joe. So what happens is you end up with a generation of Israelites that know what? All they know is we've been in the desert. We've been in the presence of God, watching the cloud during the day, watching the pillar of fire at night, walking with Moses, listening to him talk with God, come and tell us what's going on. We go into our camp a certain way, like he told us to. We built things a certain way, like he told us to. We dressed the way we were supposed to, held the ark and carried it the way we were supposed to. We did all these things. We were trained to do all of this stuff that the generation in Egypt didn't know how to do. They were being taught that, but that wasn't what they were born into. So they had to learn the second birth. The ones that came out of Egypt had this, when they crossed that sea, they were in a whole different world, whole different way of thinking. Their mindset had to change. Now, that second generation, though, they already had a mindset kind of lined up with Christ, probably a little more unified maybe, like we were talking about earlier. There was a goal, there was a place to go. They were there at the Holy Land. They knew where they were going. They had heard Moses. They had heard all the stuff he said, all the stuff he did. They knew the law. And yep. So they're about to be given something. But something has to happen before they can even go in the Holy Land. They all have to be recircumcised because they weren't circumcised. Had to cut off that flesh. They had to get that second birth like their ancestors had to get it. I think, didn't they also had to build an altar or what they built right there? They built something of remembrance of where they were to go into the Holy Land, a memorial to go into the Holy Land. So there were things they had to do to gain that other mindset before they could go into the Holy Land. But they had been trained, unlike when they were going into this new land, they were trained, unlike their ancestors who, when they showed up in the desert, weren't trained. They knew how to march. They knew when to come in and go out. They knew what to do with the tent of meeting. They knew to do with the tabernacle, all the stuff that goes along with it. They didn't have to think about all that stuff. That came natural to them. But too, when they went in the Holy Land, the mindset was maybe a little bit different there. But what was good is they didn't have to work for it. It was natural. It was a mindset that they already had. They were born into it. They had something similar to what maybe Adam and Eve had in the garden. Adam and Eve initially, they were born into it. But then what happens? They say, we're going to jump to chain of command. Like we were talking earlier, they got deceived into thinking, hey, we need this other way of thinking. But that doesn't work out. What happens? What happens, Joe? You get evicted. You get evicted from the garden, and then then you have a different mindset. So Adam and Eve had a second birth too, but it wasn't a good one. It was the reverse. It was bad. But we're kind of in that same boat today. Joe, why are you laughing, Joe? I got this down. Oh, I know. But you go from being a Hebrew to an Israelite. You go from being a slave to being in the military. You go from being in the desert to being in the Holy Land. When you get to the Holy Land, your houses is already built. Fields is already plowed. What did the second generation have other than a mindset that the first generation didn't have? When they were in the desert, they had to be fully in dependence on God for everything. The generation that came out of Egypt, they were still thinking, some of them probably, man, we need to get out of here and go back. We need to go get all this stuff we were getting from the Egyptians. We need to go back to work. Like, we lost our job. We got to go back over there. It's one of them deals. That mindset between those two generations was way different deal. So you get in the Holy Land, you don't have to plow no fields. Man, you got a house, all that stuff. But, I mean, things are still rough. I mean, they didn't do everything God asked them to do when they went in there, right? So some things happen. Mindsets change over time. You get new generations. Some start working in the flesh maybe. And we know how the rest of the story goes with Israel. But today, we're grafted into Israel too. We're grafted in, right? Into Israel. We're in it with them. We're not by ourselves in this deal, right? Jews, Gentiles, all the same thing. It's no different. We were grafted into Christ. When we go from that first birth to that second birth, the mindset has to change. It's got to be new. It can't be the same old stuff you had in the flesh beforehand. And then something else happens. We have to take in a gift that we didn't have to work for. Just like the Israelites when they went in Holy Land. We didn't work for none of it. We get to accept Christ freely, but we have to change our mind to do so. We have to get that different mindset the same way they did. Without that, it's not going to happen. We can't hold on to a belief system. We can't hold on to only this right here. This Bible, whether it was the Geneva Bible, whatever translation you might have. This is not all that can be taught. It's not all the information that you would need. Those Israelites that went in the Holy Land had none of that. They had Moses and Aaron and the Levites and the priests telling them what to do, how they needed to do it, all that stuff. They didn't know how to read. Probably didn't know how to write. Unless you were in Egypt, maybe somebody that did sculptures or whatever. Maybe that was your job. But their trust was only in one place. That was in God. Same thing for us today. When we take on that new mindset, that non-fleshly mindset, that Christ-like mindset, our thoughts are different, right? The way we act is different. Where we may go is different. Who we hang out with is different. I hang out with Joe. I hang out with Fabian, Ben Franklin, coming back from history to hang out with us, tell us about the Declaration of Independence. We end up at Amana. Don't know how we got here.
Oh, yeah.
It's just some circumstances that God put in place
That's right.
at a particular time, in a particular place. Who knows how you might have got here? We don't know how we got here. Same as the Israelites didn't know how they were getting to the Holy Land. They left Egypt. Well, we're going somewhere. We just have to trust that it's the right place. But without the change in the mindset and that change from the flesh to that second birth, that spiritual part of who we are in Christ, we're never getting to the Holy Land.